Ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever wondered what would happen if you put a race-bred Italian badge on a commuter bike built for Sunday market runs and then made it red, loud and confusing to pronounce at a traffic stop, today's your lucky day. Because we're diving into the rarest motorcycle ever to wear a Maserati badge. Yes, they made motorcycles. And yes, it's called the Maserati Tipo 116 T4, a machine so charming it could probably seduce a Vespa in a parking lot. Before we kickstart this Trident on two wheels, make sure to subscribe to Timmy Tiny Wheels, the only channel where your host wears racing goggles to drive a lawn tractor. Hit that bell so you don't miss a single piston-powered oddity. Let's ride. Now back to the 160 T4, a bike that sounds like a pasta order but runs like a Morini espresso. This machine didn't come from Maserati's racing department, but from a curious chapter in Italy's post-war economic miracle. You see, around 1953, Ida Orsi, sister of Adolfo Orsi, the then owner of Maserati, looked at Italy's booming demand for cheap transportation and thought, you know what Italy needs? Less Ferrari, more frugality. So she grabbed a spark plug factory and jumped into the motorcycle market like Bob jumps into a new conspiracy. Rather than build a motorcycle from scratch, Maserati bought a small Bologna-based company called Moto. Think of it like adopting a child and immediately handing them a Maserati badge. The 160 T4 was essentially their 158cc four-stroke tourer, repainted in red, garnished with a Trident emblem and sold as a premium lightweight Turismo Lusso. But thanks to the shared tooling, experienced machinists, and a few good espresso-fueled engineers, the result was surprisingly solid. So what did you get for your hard-earned lyre in 1954? A compact, upright tourer meant to blend economy and comfort with design cues inspired by more glamorous machines like MV Agusta. In fact, some say it looked so much like an MV 175 that if it were parked next to one at a cafe, even their own mothers might mix them up. But open the throttle and the Trident would whisper, "No worries, I'm classy." Under the tank, the Tipo 160 T4 housed a 158cc single-cylinder engine, air-cooled, four-stroke with an OHV pushrod setup. Nothing radical, but tuned for reliability and a smooth torque curve. It pumped out around 7.0 to 7.5 horsepower at 5,500 to 6,000 revolutions per minute, which sounds modest until you remember that in 1950s Italy, this was enough power to carry two people and a basket of wine uphill while singing. Fuel came through a Del Orto carb, and ignition was courtesy of Maserati's own FM240 spark plug. I think that's the only time Maserati spark plug has ever been said unironically in a motorcycle museum. The gearbox was a 4-speed manual, foot-shifted with a right-side lever, the kind of setup that always confuses modern riders. Clutch was a wet multi-plate in oil, and final drive was a chain. No electric start, it was kick only, and I imagine if you forgot the warm-up routine, you'd be doing the Modena two-step for a good 5 minutes. I can picture it clearly. One foot dancing on the kick lever, the other bracing for balance while you try not to swear in front of a nearby priest or gelato vendor. The chassis was tubular steel with a double cradle, and while some bits like the rear fender stays were pressed metal, it all held together like an Italian family reunion. Loud, a bit chaotic, but somehow functional. Front suspension was a hydraulic telescopic fork, while the rear used dual shocks on a swing arm, a real luxury compared to the pogo stick rigs of earlier bikes. Stopping was handled by drum brakes front and rear. Wheels were 19-inch, spoked rims with narrow 275/19 tires, giving it a surprisingly cushy ride over Italian cobblestones, or as Bob calls them, the government's attempt to shake secrets out of your brain. Dimensions? A wheelbase of 56 inches, about 1,422 millimeters, and a dry weight around 240 pounds, or 110 to 112 kilograms. It was light enough to manhandle around city streets, and with a comfy dual saddle, you could bring your sweetheart or your mother-in-law if you felt like negotiating tight corners with passive-aggressive advice. Top speed was roughly 62-65 miles per hour, 100 to 105 kilometers per hour, which doesn't sound like much until you remember that Italian roads in 1954 were more goat path than highway. Fuel economy? a stunning 2.5 liters per 100 kilometers, or about 94 miles per gallon in American units. A few quirky details made the 160 T4 stand out, like the tri-tip exhaust muffler shaped almost like a trident and the enclosed rear shocks. It didn't have a speedo from the factory, so you measured your speed by wind noise, gut feeling, and occasional prayers. There was also a small toolbox on the side, handy for wrenches, papers, or a sandwich if you were riding Italian style. In terms of production numbers, it's murky. Maserati wasn't exactly throwing ticker tape parades for their motorcycles. Historians say only a few hundred were made, and even fewer survived. Some were exported to South Africa, South America, and the United States, but many ended up rusting away or mistaken for MV clones. A shame, really, because if you owned one of these, you weren't just riding a bike. You were riding a footnote in the strangest chapter of Maserati's history. Now, in the grand melee of 1950s Italian motorcycles, how did the 1.6 T4 stack up? Well, against rivals like MV Agusta's 175 Turismo Lusso or Moto Morini's 160 GT, it held its own. They all had around 7 to 8 horsepower, 4 speeds, and telescopic forks. But Maserati's secret weapon wasn't speed, it was surprise. Nobody expected Maserati to show up to the motorcycle party with a drink in hand and a functioning horn. That said, MV had the racing pedigree, Morini had a massive dealer network, and Ducati had Ducati. Maserati's bikes were solid, stylish, and rare, but with limited factory support, no serious racing effort, and a shifting market leaning toward affordable cars like the Fiat 500, it was a short-lived gig. By 1960, they shut the motorcycle division down, leaving behind a trail of confused future historians and at least one collector who tried to start a Maserati bike with ignition key from his Ghibli. And yet, the 160 T4 earned its little corner of glory. It never won a Grand Prix, never broke speed records, and probably never made it into a James Bond film, but it did win the hearts of quirky collectors. In 2011, one even took second place at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance in the motorcycle class. That's like entering a dog show with a 3-legged Dachshund and still getting a ribbon. I think that says something. So what about the price? Back in the 1950s, the 160 T4 likely sold for around 180,000 Italian lire. That's roughly $290 back then, or around $3,504,000 in today's money. Basically, a few months' salary for an Italian worker. It was meant to be affordable, practical, and modestly fancy, kind of like a necktie with a hidden wine stain. But today, things have changed. In 2020, one dusty barn-find version sold for $18,222 on Bring a Trailer. 2 years later, a fully restored example from the Gene Ponda collection fetched $20,700 at RM Sotheby's, red paint gleaming like marinara on chrome. And in March 2024, another beautifully preserved 106 T4, previously owned by Maserati mechanic legend Giuseppe Candini, was auctioned off just $7,800. Someone got a bargain! Or an excuse to spend the next 3 years hunting parts on Italian forums moderated by men named Enzo. So if you ever spot one at a bike meet, probably surrounded by a small crowd of confused enthusiasts and one guy pretending he used to own one, take a moment to appreciate it. And that's it for today, friends. If you enjoyed this journey through the forgotten side of Maserati's family tree, do us a favor, like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Because on Timmy Tiny Wheels, we don't just show you the classics, we dig up the footnotes, polish the spark plugs, and remind you that everything was built by someone who said, "Sure, let's try it."